Hello and welcome to the ninth installment of Homiltea Podcast. I'm your host, Sean,
And I'm Blake.
and we got a doozy here for you today. We're going to be discussing the different religious orders in the Catholic faith. But not all priests are built the same. Um,
They are built different.
they are built different. But first, as always, we are going to jump into the readings for today. It is the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time, and the theme is He Speaks Authority. So I'll go ahead and start.
Take us away.
In the first reading, we have a reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so meditating on the great prophet Moses, the writer of Deuteronomy assures his readers that the prophetic office will be an ongoing process in Israel. I, God, will raise up for them a prophet like you, Moses, and will put my words into his mouth. God will always guide his people through his mouthpieces, the prophets. Later, this text came to be regarded as the teaching that God would send a final end-time prophet. These are the terms in which Jesus saw himself, and more explicitly, in which the early church understood him. Just as Moses spoke with authority, so did the Lord Jesus. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. What? It's it's very interesting. If you guys are following along in the Bible in a Year and in the Catechism in a Year, by the way, highly recommend. Um,
Yes.
you will understand what I'm about to say is the overall theme that's been going on in the past couple of days is linking both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Um, Prophets are the mouthpieces of God, as it says. And what God does through these prophets is, well, prophesize. But a lot of people don't ever take it that way. They just take it as a prophet saying God's words and it's beautiful and that's it. Whenever the person comes who is prophesized, people have a hard time of believing the truth, especially when it came to Christ. Um, and for a while, actually, people had a hard time believing Moses because Moses was raised up by the pharaohs. He was royal, adopted royal blood, in a sense, and a lot of people believe that he was kind of like a two-faced guy. But he ended up leading all the Jews out of Egypt during Exodus, and Christ was doing the same in a different way. Obviously, the Christ is a lot larger figure than Moses, um, but you have to take in a sense that there is always an interlock with the New Testament. There's even some people who believe that the New Testament is like the new Bible in the sense that we don't really need the Old Testament anymore, but we do. We need both.
Oh yeah, we need that.
We need
We
that.
need that.
Um, so
Yeah.
you have to respect God using the prophets and the mouthpieces um, to portray a story that well takes time. If
Yeah.
God gave us everything that was in the Bible in a matter of a few days, I don't think a lot of people would really take it in. Be honest
Yeah.
with you, I think a lot of people would kind of disregard it as some sort of novel, and then that was it. So for him to take his time and really portray stories out in order to lead up to the Christ, I think it's beautiful, and I think we should respect both books in a sense.
Yeah. The Old Testament's actually like if you read it, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Old Testament's pretty
I'd
good.
highly recommend.
Like, yeah, really the whole Bible. But
Again, Bible in a Year, Catechism in a Year. Not too late to start. Go ahead and do it. All right, Blake, take us away.
taking us away on this beautiful train that we call the responsorial psalm, leaving station 95, Psalm 95. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So, really, what I'm kind of seeing from this, so harden not your hearts, it kind of goes back to whatever is said in the Old Testament with Pharaoh and Moses. Um, you know, you hear that word hardened your heart a lot in those readings in that scripture. And I think in the Bible in Your podcast, and I'm sure you've gotten to that point yet, where it talks about that, like whatever God means by hardening your heart. Like God's not hardening Pharaoh's heart to like block out everything, but it's like hardening his heart to understand what is happening around him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, did you get to that point in the podcast in that point of the podcast yet with Exodus?
So we are actually
And
about to enter Exodus in the
okay, so
podcast,
you're like right before that.
right before it.
Okay, so whenever you listen to those few episodes, Father Mike Schmitz like explains it perfectly and actually like dissects the words for that.
Mm-hmm.
So read this Psalm 95, and then go back and read Exodus, and the two will mesh well together. Um, I'll just read like one more little piece too. So come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord who made us, for He is our God, and we are His people. He shepherds the flock and He guides. So the reason why I wanted to read that is because it's going to tie into the gospel whenever I talk about it a little bit later. But bowing down in worship of the Lord, that high worship that we have in the church, the high level worship of the mass. Those are all these things that we have and that we can use to our advantage. But remember that before I go into the gospel. But take us away on Saint Paul.
So St. Paul today is writing to the Corinthians. In this passage, he says, notice that Paul does not condemn marriage or sex as something inferior. He recommends celibacy as a way of life for those who are called to it, and offers just one reason for it: freedom to be concerned with the things of the Lord. There are many more. You should read this passage in its total context of chapter 7 and remember the background from which Paul reasons the patriarchal marriage pattern of his time and culture, which as such is not part of the divine revelation. So there's a lot of talk with young Catholics today because a lot of people, well, have sex before marriage. And a lot of people nowadays have sex with the people of the same gender, or all sorts of different loopholes. But what Paul is talking about is recommending celibacy in order to understand God a little bit better instead of understanding the ways of the world. In order to understand God more, we need to walk with God and become more Christ-like. And, well, Christ, he was a celibate man. That's what he was.
Yeah,
Um, and, of course, people will argue with that, and those people are not even worth listening to, be honest with you.
they make arguments about that. The fact
Unfortunately,
that Jesus wasn't celibate.
yeah,
Wow.
it's you guys should check out our comment section on any social media. It is quite a interesting debate, and you will notice that we never comment ever. So we never respond to
Wow.
them because sometimes it's just ridiculous. Anyways, um, when people enter the I can't speak on firsthand, but when people enter the sacrament of holy orders, they are proclaiming to be celibate for the rest of their life, at least, because there are priests who either married before or weren't celibate. Let's just put it that way. Weren't celibate.
Yeah.
So they are, throwing that away. They're becoming chastised, and in order to throw away the lust, the sex, everything of the world, in order to understand God's will more clearly. And I think that's an important message for a lot of people. And for a lot of people who do struggle with the fact that maybe they did have sex before marriage. I'm not a theologian, but I would say that, yeah, I'm not a theologian, so I'm not an expert. But I would say
None of
that
us are experts.
um,
We're not doctors of
we're
the
not.
church.
We're not. But I think it would be a very important fact to stop and to really understand what it means for something like that to happen and to sin no more, like Jesus asks us all the time. So, Blake, bring us home with the gospel. We've had some
Whew.
pretty heavy heating
Yeah. These
hitting
are heavy topics.
topics.
Yeah. These are very heavy themes today. And probably the most this one is just ooh, this one really hits you. So we're reading from the Gospel of Mark and chapter 1 verses 21 through 28. So really the entire purpose of this reading is to talk about the authority that Jesus is giving his people. So the summary of this little expert from Mark. So Jesus is going into this synagogue and he's teaching in front of the Jews, but he's not referring to the scribes. He's referring to himself. And just imagine yourself in that time period when someone walks in to a synagogue and is preaching the word of God, but he's not referring to scribes, he's referring to himself.
Yeah.
That's pretty heavy. Like that is
Blasphemy.
crazy. Yeah, blasphemous, literally. Um, but if you want to understand the purpose of Christianity, if you want to understand the purpose of the Catholic Church, read this. Read this scripture from Mark. Um, Jesus is literally giving us the authority to build his church. That just read it. That's literally what it is. Um, authority is such a it's a weird word, and we always refer back to Father Mike Schmitz, but he explains it so well, especially to our generation and really to people that are not Catholic and that don't understand that. But he has a really great video on why to be Catholic and not Christian or like non-denominational, like why be Catholic and not another denomination. And authority is one of the biggest um, pieces of that. And I'm sure he does refer to Mark, the Gospel of Mark, in there somewhere. It's been a while since I've seen the video, but he does talk about the authority and directly correlates it back to Jesus, in the synagogue. So, um, yeah, that's Gospel of Mark. Pretty good stuff today.
Pretty good stuff. Pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah,
If
heavy
you
stuff.
have, obviously this is, again, pretty serious topics. I can't reiterate it enough. If you have any questions or concerns, you can either put them down in the comments or message us directly, and hopefully we get back with you in time for you to receive your answer. May not be the answer you want, but it probably is the answer that you need. And again, we're not theologians. We're not
No.
doctors of the church, but we can give a response on being a young adult in the Catholic faith as best as we can.
Yeah.
Now, on to the fun part of this episode, the main topic, religious orders. What are they? Well, I'd like to point out that there are about 2,500 total religious orders in the Catholic
What?
Church.
2,500?
2,500.
Jeez.
Yeah, the church is about unity in diversity. Clearly, with 2,500, not all priests, again, are built the same. They're built different. Okay.
They are built different.
But we
yeah.
are going to be covering the main ones. If we were here for 2,500, we would be here for probably 3, maybe 4 hours just talking about that, and we would be, skimming a lot of the detail off. of the differences between them all. And there's probably, very slight differences in those, but in the main ones that we're going to be talking about, there are some major differences in
Yeah.
how they preach and how they worship and how they actually do penance to themselves. And the main ones are the Dominicans, the Franciscans, the Benedictines, the Jesuits, and the Carmelites. And obviously, Blake is a big fan of the Benedictines. If you saw what was going on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So
Oh yeah.
Blake, go ahead and take us away with getting this thing started.
Man, all right. So I think we have to start off with the best one, and that is the Benedictines. I'm sorry, you can't come at me. That is by far the best one. You want to know why it's the best one? Because it was the first one. It was the first one that's ever started. Um, Founded in 529. Go back to 2 episodes ago when we were talking about like early church, early Christianity. These were like the first ones to even develop a religious order. You want to know Saint Benedict, notable saint of the Benedictines, hence Saint Benedict. Um, so my little note that I have on here. So Saint Benedict had a extraordinary insight into both human fragility and capability. His rule dictates a way of life that is possible for anyone, regardless of whether or not they are called to be a hermit. However, it also demands enough of its followers to keep them from becoming lax. So they're pretty strict guys, and they have none. They have 7,500 Benedictine monks and over 13,000 nuns worldwide. It is insane. Um, but if you ever see like the Benedictine medal or the Benedictine cross,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm pretty sure almost every maybe every religious order, or I know the top ones, like the biggest ones, they have their own crucifixes, which is pretty cool,
We
and it kind of
actually
focuses on the main ones.
on our rosary, the homily rosary, we have a medal from Saint Benedict on ours,
Yes,
on our
yeah.
crucifix. So
It's really cool. Doing research on like literally the first one. And some other notable saints are Anselm of Canterbury and Francis of Rome. Some pretty heavy hitters for the church. But these guys were hermits, like legit hermits, living everywhere. And you know, when you think of a like a monastery or something like that, you think of like maybe this big castle in the mountains in Europe, and it's like this beautiful castle and church and chapel and all that. No, no. The Benedictines, they were like living under a rock
mm-hmm.
and devoted their life to Christ. So that is like the epitome of devoting your life and taking a vow of chastity and poor. Like it's amazing to me how these people can do that. But yeah, Benedictines, great one to
Really.
start off with.
All right, so the next one I have is, let's go with Franciscans. I'll talk about
Okay.
the Order of Friars Minor. Now, if you guys ever want to like pick apart who is who, most of these priests who write books will have after their name, like uh, some people have the doctorate of physical therapy, DPT, or they'll have some sort of like if they're a personal trainer, they'll have CSCS, some sort of certification. Well, that's kind of the same when it comes to a priest. Whenever they have random letters behind their name. So
Mm-hmm.
Benedictines, I don't remember what their, I think it would maybe just be OB
Um,
or OSB, but
I don't
the
know.
Franciscans have OFM. If you ever see that behind their name, they are part of the Franciscan religious order. Founded in 1209 in Assisi, Italy, Italiano.
Italiano.
Saint Francis, one of the most famous saints in the history of the church, uh, created the order of Franciscan friars, or the friars minor. And what the What it says is the basic contours of his life are this: he was born a rich merchant's son and had a powerful conversion experience that included a surprising amount of public nudity. All right. He left home in 1206 to become a hermit in a cave, which was likely inspired the song, and he prayed to the church of
San
Damiano.
Damiano.
Oh, wow, you knew it. In Assisi, where he heard
San Damiano crucifix right there.
the words, "Repair my house, which has been virtually ruined." He took those words and bit too literally, but 12 brothers joined him anyway. The brothers embraced a life of radical prayer, poverty, brotherhood, and evangelism, eventually attracting more and more brothers, spreading throughout Europe. So the Franciscans are still known for the principles of the early brothers. They believe that God's extraordinary love is applied to the simplest of creatures, which has led to the association with animals. They are also known for their love for the poor, which is true. They've always cared for the poor, especially if you watch the movie Robin Hood. You'll see a friar in there, and that is a Franciscan friar. Um, they are very in touch with the gospel, and they follow the
Yeah.
gospel to a T. They are very, very strict. I know that for a fact after meeting a couple of them. And notable saints are Anthony of Padua,
Oh yeah.
Elizabeth of Hungary, St. Thomas More, Padre Pio,
Oh.
St. Bonaventure, St. Junipero Serra, and St. Angela of Foligno. So those are some notable Franciscan
Those are very
friars.
popular saints too.
Yeah,
Like those are very major
there's some
saints in
big
the church.
dogs in there.
Yeah. You know, I always imagine like in heaven, do all of the religious orders have like their own little like I don't know, like their own little area,
Mm-hmm.
and then like are they all just kind of like posted up to one another,
Mm.
like
Did I say St.
like
Thomas
just staring
Aquinas?
each other down?
Yeah. Did I say St. Thomas Aquinas?
St. Thomas Aquinas?
No, it's St. Thomas More. If I said St. Thomas Aquinas, I
No,
apologize. If
yeah,
I said
no,
St.
Saint
Thomas,
it was Saint Thomas More.
okay, it's St. Thomas More
Saint Thomas
because
Aquinas was Dominican.
yes. So if you want to
Yeah.
jump into that, you can.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and talk
Uh,
about the Dominicans.
Before we move on, Crucifix San Damiano, blessed by JP2.
That's his signature, by the way. Um,
Yeah.
in Sharpie. He did it himself.
He wrote it.
Got it off of eBay for a nice price.
Yeah. So yeah, the Dominicans. So we know Dominicans fairly well because the Dominicans ran our college campus ministry
Yes.
for the longest time. I think our first year it was a diocesan priest, and then the Dominicans took over.
Yep.
And then the one of the major churches in our city where our college is run by Dominicans.
Yep.
So
We knew
and the
Dominicans
high school too. So
very, very well.
yeah. So we are very familiar with Dominicans. Um, Dominicans are interesting. You will notice when you see a Dominican, they're either wearing an all white habit or a white and black habit. That's their colors. So if you see like the colors white and black together, probably Dominican. Um, I know Ascension Press has this little thing on here, but I think this just talks about Saint Dominic. But Saint Dominic, I believe he started the Dominican order. Um, so he began to preach the truth against the Al- Albigensian heresy, which denied the incarnation and sacraments and professed lots of other terrible ideas. That is really bad. Dominic is fascinating because as he began his preaching ministry, he immediately formed convents to pray for the preachers and their converts. That means the Dominicans had nuns before they had religious brothers. Wow. So they were getting nuns before they started getting the brothers in there.
Mm-hmm.
Dominic received special permission from Pope Innocent III. The preach the gospel wherever he went. In light of his background and their history of fighting heresy, the Dominican order is known for their dedication to studying and teaching. Some of the greatest teachers in the history of the church were Dominican, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great.
Yep.
We are very familiar with those saints, obviously, but they are the ones that really, really taught the teachings of the church during their time.
That's actually pretty funny that they're together, because maybe some of y'all know who watch, but the others who don't know that watch our stuff is that St. Albert was the church on campus that Blake and I went
Yeah,
to, and then St. Thomas Aquinas was the high school that was near our college.
I wonder if they did that on purpose.
I feel like there's something
There's
there.
no way that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
It can't be.
Anyways.
That's- But yeah. So yeah, that's the Dominicans. Yeah, Dominicans have a lot of schools. I know there's schools in New Orleans. Dominicans ran. Yeah, I mean they're pretty big throughout the world. Um, I guess my next one I would say for you be the Carmelites. This is an
Yes.
interesting
You
one.
knew I was going to do this one.
This is an interesting one.
And I'll explain why in just a sec. But the Brothers of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Carmelites. So you will see BVM behind the Carmelites as their usual suffixes. Were founded around the 12th century. There's no specific date, but they were found on Mount Carmel in northern Israel. The Carmelites don't have an official founding date, as Christian hermits were living on Mount Carmel shortly after the time of the Crusades. These early Carmelites built cells around a central chapel dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Because of this, the Carmelites considered Elijah, who had visions on Mount Carmel, and the Blessed Virgin to be their patrons. The Carmelites had to leave the Holy Land for Europe in 1235. Their new location meant that they had to adjust their way of life, as it was difficult to be a desert hermit in London. Crazy.
Wow.
The women formed cloisters, and the men became mendicant, meaning that they began to preach and take on apostolates. Carmelites' origin as hermits and their evolution into the mendicants are responsible for their unique charism. The heart of the Carmelite charism is contemplation, which they view as threefold. First, they live a life of prayer to build friendship with God. Second, they live in community, which allows them to love God through their neighbors. And third, they live lives of service in order to be in God's hand in the world. Carmelites serve in a variety of apostolates, types of communities in around 40 provinces. Notable saints: Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint John of the Cross, Saint Edith Stein, Saint Elizabeth of the Trinity, and Saint Teresa of the Andes. Crazy that there's three of them that named Teresa. My mom's named Teresa, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool. Carmelites are extremely important to me because I do a Marian consecration right now, which means that I will have to do a Marian consecration every single year from here on out, because I will have a devotion to Mary, the Blessed Virgin. And the Carmelites treat this very, very seriously. I may only do it once a year, but they do every single Marian consecration, I believe, if not multiple.
There's different. How many different ones are there?
Let's see.
There- So you do like I'm sure you could do like a 9-day one or a
Yeah, so like a novena.
9-week one. Yeah, something like that.
Right, but a Marian consecration or a Marian total or Marian devotion or a Marian total consecration are 33 days.
Okay.
Um let's see. Let's
I wonder,
see.
I wonder what theirs looks like. I mean, their whole life is dedicated to that, so I'm sure they do it every day. But
There are 6 formal Marian consecrations.
Okay.
However, there are probably about 3 other ones that are informal. I'm doing one that's informal right now,
Okay.
with Our Lady of Lords. So these people, the Carmelites, treat that stuff very, very seriously. So I kind of have a nice little tie-in with the Carmelites. And again, they are like the Benedictines. They were hermits. They were living in caves. They were not living in castles. And it would, if you bring those types of people into Europe and London, it's kind of different.
Yeah.
Even
They weren't
back in
like them
1235.
Dominicans. Them Dominicans had castles, man.
Mm-mm. So, Blake, what is the next religious order?
I think before we go into the next one, I do want to explain the difference between monks and priests.
Yes.
So, monks are different than priests. Priests obviously, have a service to the community and, do mass every day. They're assigned to a church parish, all that kind of stuff. That's like your this is a terrible word, but it's like corporate, like that's how priests are. And then monks are not like priests. So a priest takes holy orders, and that's how they're a priest. Now, a monk is different. They can take holy orders and they can do um, priestly functions as a monk. Obviously, there are, some of those monks in those different monasteries have to take holy orders in order for them to have mass in those very secluded monasteries. But some monks can literally just dedicate their life to Christ and take their vows and all this other stuff. So that is kind of the main difference between the two. Um, Let me think. There was one on here that I did that I really don't know too much about, um, but kind of want to talk about it. They're called the Carthusians.
The Carthusians?
Order are the Order of Saint Bruno. I don't think I've ever heard of them before, but they were founded in 1084. Um, it was near Grenoble, and let's see. So Saint Bruno of is that Cologne.
Oh,
I don't
in
know how to
Germany,
pronounce that.
Cologne.
Cologne. Okay, so German. He was a priest in the 11th century who didn't want to be a bishop. Um, when his fate became to appear inevitable, he and his two friends made a vow to renounce secular concerns, in part due to corruption that he saw in France at the time. So they spent a few months with the founders of what would later become the Cis Cistercian order. That is a tongue twister, but discerned out after picking up four more followers. They then approached Saint Hugh of. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. We're going to just say Saint Hugh. He had a vision of the seven men and sent them into a valley in the French Alps that was only accessible by a thin and dangerous ravine. What? They immediately built in an oratory and cells to live in. The Carthusians are known for their particularly austere life. St. Bruno didn't leave a rule, but later monks compiled his teachings and added them to other writings of monastic life to create the Statutes of the Carthusian Order. Um, these statutes include rules for keeping one's private cell in order, keeping silence, observing enclosure, and fasting and abstinence. So these guys were literally in the middle of nowhere, no outside contact, and they were just quiet. Historical events haven't been kind to the Carthusians. They were persecuted and banned during the Reformation in England, obviously, and suffered a similar fate in the French Revolution. Yet there's still about 450 total providing for themselves by producing the liqueur Cartouche. Um, so the whole continuance of their way is summed up in this motto, and it's in Latin. So please do not scold me in the comments, but it says "Stat crux dum volvitur orbis." The cross is steady while the world is turning. That's pretty heavy. That is some
Mm-hmm.
heavy stuff right there. The cross is steady while the world is turning. Man, these guys don't play around.
No.
This is wild. So even while the world is just going on and doing their things, the cross is there and steady, and they're following it. That's pretty heavy.
That is very heavy.
Notable saints: Hugh of Lincoln, Dominic of Prussia, and Blessed Nicholas Albergati. So those are the Carthusians. Interesting. I've never read those before. Never even knew they existed.
Well, here's another one that I didn't know existed. It is the Norbertons.
Yeah, never heard of them either.
No idea what this is, but we're gonna dive into it, and then we'll save one that we all know for the end. Um, the Order of Canons, regular of Premontre. It's French. I don't know French. Um, yeah. Anyways, Norbertons, founded in 1120 in France. Saint Norbert, or Norbert, I should say, of Xanten, came from an influential family. He was friends with the archbishops and emperors and was on track to be a man who was quite important in his time, but ultimately lost to history. His life abruptly changed in the trajectory in 1115 when he was nearly struck by a lightning bolt and thrown from his horse. Wow.
Jeez,
This near-death experience sparked his conversion. He went to a Benedictine monastery and was ordained a priest. However, Norbert had seen his decline in the priest faith throughout France and the rest of Europe. He wanted to create a religious order that would reform the clergy, much like he had his friend Bernard of Clairvaux. I guess I don't know. I'm just butchering this
yeah,
entirely.
ball.
Clairvaux was forming to reform a monasticism, the Cistercians. Dude, I'm butchering this. I'm so sorry.
Tongue
As he
twisters in here.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird words, French words in here that I just cannot
Yeah,
get.
we're not European. Sorry.
Sorry. As he prayed about the kind of order he should form, St. Augustine appeared to him and gave him a copy of the Rule of St. Augustine. Our Lady appeared later and gave him the white habit of the Norbertons. I don't know what that is.
Nice.
All right, cool. There are 5 pillars of the Norberton communities. First is the praise of God through chanting the liturgy of the hours and celebrating Mass. Nice.
Ooh, I like these.
Second is the
guys.
zeal for souls, typically in ways that a diocesan priest failed to in St. Norbert's time, such as administering the sacraments and teaching. The third pillar is a habitual penance for the sins of the world, especially those committed against the Eucharist. Fourth is a devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, as Norbert is renowned for defeating a heresy that denied the real penance of Christ in the Eucharist. Finally, is the fifth pillar in the Norbertines is a devotion to Our Lady, who was involved in the founding of the order. Today, there are about 1,300 Norbertins active in 23 countries. These guys don't play.
Wow.
We may not know who they are, but they are pretty serious, which is probably why we don't know who they are, because they take in very few members. Only 1,300 people in the entire world are Norbertins.
Dude, their 5 pillars, that's like the most important things that we have issues with in the church right now. Like, that's crazy.
A lot of covering the Eucharist as well.
Yeah. Like the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that's like probably the most important one that they've been talking about a lot.
I may have butchered that to death, but the Norbertins have impressed me. Notable saints is the Blessed Hugh of Fossé, Saint Evermode, and Saint Gerlach. So, Norbertins, you are on the map. Thank you. That's awesome. All right, for the last and more notable religious order, Blake, take us home with the Jesuits.
You left me with the Jesuits. Oh man, I feel like I have a love-hate relationship with the
Why
Jesuits.
do you have a love-hate
Um,
relationship with the Jesuits, Blake? Tell me. Tell the whole
oh
world
man,
why you have a
it's just.
Go ahead.
Let me compile my thoughts real quick. This is raw emotion right now.
Does it have something to do with high school, Blake?
No, not at all.
Uh,
Could be.
could be. I think those of you guys who don't know, Blake's high school rival was Jesuit high school.
Many of our high school rivals. No one liked Jesuit, and if you went to Jesuit and are listening to this, I'm sorry. Um,
Again,
okay, so
the raw
the
emotion.
Jesuits. Yeah, raw emotion right here. Started in 1500s. Um, Funny enough, the church that I went to this past Sunday was a Jesuit church, which was pretty cool, and I now know why I probably wouldn't go back there again. Um, so the Jesuits are a religious order founded by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, noted for its educational, missionary, and charitable works. The order has been regarded by many as a principal agent of the Counter Reformation and was later a leading force in modernizing the church. Modernizing the church.
Not
Keyword
traditional.
modernizing. Anyway, so the order grew out of the activity of Ignatius, a Spanish soldier who experienced a religious conversion during a period of convalescence from a wound received in battle. After a period of intense prayer, he composed the Spiritual Exercises, a guidebook to convert the heart and mind to a closer following of Jesus. Um, on August 15th, 1534, at Paris, six young men who had met him at the University of Paris and made a retreat according to the spiritual exercise joined him in vows of poverty, chastity, and pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, this story kind of goes on to talk about what they did there, and what they saw, different heresies, and how the spiritual exercise kind of helped them battle a bunch of things. Um, Now, as you may know, the Jesuits are a very modern religious order.
Keyword.
Keyword modern. Um, if you ever, so every religious order kind of has their own mass, which is pretty cool. Like it's the same mass, same fundamentals of mass, but it's different things that they say during like the consecration that are different with different religious orders. So like the Jesuits have their own. I think the Carmelites, Dominicans, like they all kind of have their own little twist to it, which kind of in return I think aligns with like their values and their pillars of what they believe in. Um, so whenever I was like sitting in mass this past Sunday, well, the first thing is I should have realized that I was on Loyola's campus, St. Ignatius of Loyola, and then I saw the Jesuit, what is it called, their emblem, and I was like, wow, I'm in a Jesuit church, and then I realized I was like, wow, the Jesuits are modern. Wow, Pope Francis was the first Jesuit to be elected pope, and I'm like, oh man, I need to get out of here. But other than that, the mass was absolutely beautiful. That was probably some of the best music I've ever heard in any mass before. Um, but if you want to understand how to become a modern Catholic, go to a Jesuit church, and you'll see why. But all love to the Jesuits, brothers and sisters in Christ. Um, yeah, just stop being modern. That's all I have to say.
Oh
Even though
man.
that's what they're founded on.
Yeah. So obviously, Jesuits. If you want to have an extreme, you have the Jesuits on the modern, and then traditionalism, which Blake and I preach about all the time, is more Benedictine, and apparently it's more Nobares. No,
Yeah,
no barons.
yeah,
Um, so going into this, uh, my favorites were of course the Carmelites, because I go through a Marian consecration. I am devoted to Mary, and I mean, the Carmelites basically embody that, right? Um, Coming out of it, my favorites are the Nobarans, and I butchered the entire passage, and I'm so sorry, but those 5 pillars, um, I'll reiterate it, because it's important for us to know. Um, the 5 pillars of the Nobarans communities. First is to praise the God through the chanting of the liturgy of the hours and celebrating mass. Second is the zeal for souls, typically in ways that the diocesan priests failed to in Aubaire's time, such as administering the sacraments and teaching. The third pillar is habitual penance for the sins of the world, especially those committed against the Eucharist. And fourth, the devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, as Nobaire was renowned for defeating heresy that denied the real penance of Christ in the Eucharist. And finally is the fifth pillar of Nobairans, in a devotion to Our Lady, who was involved in the founding of the order. So again, Blake was hitting it right on the hammer, right on the nail. That those are like 5 things that we actually struggle with to this day, and I feel like the Nobarans were accepting of more people because there's only 1,300 in the entire world. They
Yeah.
could probably do some real damage. However, their strict teachings keep them at such a like a low level, which I respect because quality over quantity, especially in these days.
Yeah.
Um, but as you can see, according to his teaching, again, all love, all love. We
All
all
love.
worship the same God and everything. Um, but the Jesuits are probably the one order that would probably have the biggest problem with our podcast. If I
Yeah,
had to
they're
guess,
definitely not listeners
yeah,
of
they
our
are.
podcast.
They, yeah. We'll leave it at that. Blake, how about you? Going into this, what was your favorite order and coming out?
So my favorite is probably gonna have to be the Franciscans, um, only because now the Franciscans there was multiple
This
orders
is your
of the
favorite after,
Franciscans.
or this is your favorite before?
Probably my favorite after
Okay.
our conversation. After hearing all of them now, I do like all of them, but I think I still go back to the Franciscans every single time, and specifically the second order of the Franciscans. So the Franciscans, they were when they were first founded in 1209, and then there was a second order of the Franciscans that was founded, and that was in the year 1253.
Mm-hmm.
So specifically that order, they are called the poor. I think the Poor Sisters of Saint Clare,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the Franciscan order. And so essentially the whole reason how they kind of became about, so they had these like the foundation of poor ladies in the time, and they went to St. Francis so that they could be embraced in a new manner of life that he had instituted at the time with his order. So in Assisi, Italy, during that time, they kind of made this petition to go talk to St. Francis, um, draw up all these documents where they could be a part of that. And then it was ratified by cardinals and popes and all this other stuff. So the reason why I say this is because my great aunt was a nun of the Poor Clares.
Mm.
And that is why the Franciscans have always been kind of important in my life, and my confirmation saint, obviously Saint Anthony, Franciscan. So yeah, Franciscans, I like them. Really, really big on the poor too. Really, really big on the poor. And if you go to any New Orleans church, there's always a poor box, and it's Saint Anthony's poor box, and they have them in every New Orleans church, and they donate that money to charity. Saint Vincent de Paul, like whatever it is. But yeah, Franciscans. That's my top choice.
Okay. All right. Well, good deal. So yeah, we have those. I think for both of us, honestly, like a top, like a second would probably be the Benedictines.
Oh yeah,
Especially
easily.
because their ideals really line up with this podcast,
Yeah,
in traditionalism. And again, I'm so sorry to the Jesuits. You are not gonna like our podcast one bit. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Again, all love to our Catholic brothers and sisters. But no, you're
Just
not gonna like it.
lovely banter. That's all
Lovely
it is.
banter. You know, everyone has his favorite sports team.
Yeah.
Here on the podcast, we have a favorite religious order, and we have a least
Yeah.
favorite religious order. So, unfortunately, they will get that. My patron saint, he is Saint Ezekiel Moreno Idiaz, who was a Spanish Catholic friar in the order of the Augustinian Recollects. We did not cover them. And again, there's 2,500 um, uh, religious orders, and we were supposed to cover 5 of them. We ended up covering 7 of them. So
Whoa, 7. It's a good number.
7. Oh, whoa, big number.
It's a
We
good
didn't even
number.
realize that, and yeah. So if you have a favorite religious order, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah.
It could be one of the ones we talked about. It could be one of the ones we didn't talk about. Since there's 2,500 of them, they're bound to like one of them. Um, Thank you guys for watching this video. It means a lot to us. You guys are absolutely killing it on our social media.
Yeah.
YouTube, it's ridiculous. Blake and I have been texting that nonstop for a couple of days that it is crazy the numbers we are receiving. We're truly blessed to be preaching the word of God to you guys, the living word. You know, big capital L and big capital W on that.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for watching. Blake and I really do appreciate this, and we love coming out. We have a lot coming up. Our next, I think, 6 episodes are really powerful messages, and we may even have some special hosts for not maybe one, maybe all of them. We don't know yet. So stay tuned, subscribe, leave a comment on your favorite religious order. And if you're listening to this on Spotify and Apple, hit the follow. Listen to us in the car. Obviously, don't text and drive, but you can also,
You do that.
listen to us. So we thank you so much, guys, and God bless and shalom.
God bless.